What if the person who sent you to prison never actually identified you at all? For Sheldon Thomas, a single photograph of someone else entirely would cost him nearly 2 decades of his life. And even after that mistake was exposed, the system didn't stop. In December 2004, Sheldon Thomas was 17 years old, living in the East Flatbush neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. On Christmas Eve, a shooting broke out at a gathering on a residential street. A 14-year-old boy was killed. Another person was injured. Police quickly began searching for suspects. At the time, nothing suggested that Sheldon Thomas, a teenager with no connection to the shooting, would become the focus of the case. But the investigation would soon take a critical wrong turn. As detectives worked to identify those responsible, they prepared a photo array, a group of 6 images shown to a witness. Their goal was to see if anyone looked familiar. But instead of using a photograph of Sheldon Thomas, police mistakenly selected a photo of a completely different man who happened to share the same name. That incorrect image was placed into the lineup. When the witness was shown the photos, they confidently pointed to the picture of the other Sheldon Thomas. That should have ended the matter. Instead, it became the beginning of a nightmare. Despite the witness identifying the photograph of someone else, detectives arrested the Sheldon Thomas, who lived in the same police precinct. He insisted he had nothing to do with the shootings, but once the wheels of the system began turning, they didn't slow down. Incredibly, the same witness later identified Sheldon Thomas again, this time in a live lineup, unknowingly confirming what police already believed. At this point, the witness had identified 2 different people as the shooter. Rather than stop and reassess, investigators moved forward. More than a year later, during a pre-trial hearing in 2006, the truth finally surfaced. A detective admitted under oath that the photograph shown to the witness was not Sheldon Thomas. He also acknowledged that he had previously testified falsely about that detail. Another officer confirmed that Thomas had told police early on that he was not one of the people in the photo array. The mistake was no longer a theory. It was a fact. But instead of dismissing the case, the court ruled that there was still enough reason to proceed, citing anonymous tips and a supposed resemblance between Thomas and the man in the photograph. Even knowing the identification was wrong, the case moved forward. When the case went to trial, the jury was never fully informed of how deeply flawed the identification process had been. Prosecutors presented testimony suggesting that one of the shooters had fired from a vehicle, without telling the jury that charges against another suspect tied to that claim had already been dismissed. Legal experts later concluded that this selective presentation could easily mislead jurors, but at the time the jury was left to decide based on an incomplete picture. In 2007, Sheldon Thomas was convicted on multiple charges. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. At just 20 years old, he entered the New York prison system, maintaining his innocence as the years passed. Outside the prison walls, the system treated his conviction as final. Inside, time stood still. For nearly 2 decades, Thomas lived behind bars, while the legal record showed a conviction built on error. Then, something changed. In Brooklyn, the district attorney's conviction review team, a team dedicated to re-examining questionable cases, reopened his file. What they found was alarming. Investigators concluded that Sheldon Thomas should never have been arrested in the first place. They found the initial photo identification did not depict him. Detectives steered the investigation toward him. Witness identification procedures were compromised. There was no reliable evidence tying him to the crime. Experts comparing the 2 men later agreed they did not closely resemble each other. The case from start to finish had been fundamentally unfair. In March 2023, Brooklyn District Attorney Eric Gonzalez moved to vacate Thomas's conviction. A judge agreed. After nearly 19 years in prison, Sheldon Thomas walked free. Now 35 years older, he thanked supporters and even expressed forgiveness toward those involved, though no legal ruling could return the years he had lost. Freedom did not erase the damage. Relearning life, reconnecting with family, rebuilding identity. In 2024, the city of New York agreed to a $6.5 million settlement, acknowledging the injustice Thomas endured. But compensation could never replace time. Sheldon Thomas's story is not just about one wrongful conviction. It's about how errors are ignored, how systems protect themselves, and how long injustice can persist once it's set in motion. It raises an unsettling question. If a mistake this clear could be overlooked for 18 years, how many others are still waiting? If this story made you think, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more true stories that demand accountability.